Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. It is the Game Plan with Greg Barnes and Jason Staples. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. And with the Game Plan, it's a little special edition. We've got Jason Staples, we've got Greg Barnes and me, we've got Carolina, and we've got Florida State. And we were talking off air. It could be the Mack Brown Bowl, but I much prefer the Doc Staples Bowl. How about that, Greg Barnes? Doesn't that ring? That's a new tradition this year.
I think the test here and who gains supremacy is what records. Mack Brown is 0-10 against Florida State. Jason, when you were with the Seminoles, what was your record against North Carolina?
Next question.
Are you just here so you don't get fined by Ben Sherman? I'll let you off the hook. I don't want to.
Next question on that one. Let's just say that Mac and I have not had the most success crossing over to the other side. I don't know what it is, but we seem not to have done the best going back.
It is quite an interesting dynamic, Greg. Mack Brown's futility against the Seminoles, but that last one still sticks in his craw. He mentions it every chance he gets. He's done it again this week. This is a game. I mean, Carolina's got to figure it out. It's not the coach. It's not the programs. It's the individual teams. But somehow, some way, Carolina's got to get this done on Saturday, right?
Yeah, that's one of the great things about sports is that we can talk about X's and O's and schemes and players and personnel and coaches and all these things. But for whatever reason, sometimes it's rivalries, sometimes it's just random opponents that one team will have problems with another team. And for North Carolina, it's been Florida State. Now, to be fair, when Mack Brown was in Chapel Hill the first time, Florida State was the Alabama of the time, right? I mean, they were year in and year out one of the best teams in the country. So you can kind of understand some of those struggles then. But as we saw last year, North Carolina was feeling pretty good about itself. And going back and listening to some of the press conferences before that game was fascinating because Mack Brown, as he said today, it wasn't a matter where he wanted to completely neuter his guys and say, look, you're not as good as the top 5 ranking. But in listening to those press conferences last year, he was saying it without really saying it. He's really saying, you know what? Big Ten's not playing yet. Pac-12's not playing yet. We haven't really earned this, but let's roll the ball out there and let's see what happens. And we all saw what happened. It wasn't a good start, and they made a valiant rally there late, but it wasn't enough. So yeah, Tom, I really think it is. It's one of those unique situations where, as bad as North Carolina looked against Virginia Tech, as bad as they looked against Georgia Tech, they didn't have that outside motivation that they do for this game. I mean, they were embarrassed on national television in Tallahassee last year as the number 5 team in the country against the Florida State team that I believe was 1-3 at the time. And they were down 31-7, 24-zip. And people probably turn off the TV before they staged their late rally. So Sam Howell acknowledged that earlier this week. This is a game. They understood what took place, and you got to forget about a lot of the things that kind of go into all these games and say, you know what, we take that personally, and we're going to come out and we're going to outwork them. We're going to play harder than them, and we're going to win the game by any means. And we haven't seen this North Carolina really do that. And that's part of the program building aspect that Mack Brown is desperately trying to instill.
Your comment there about outworking them, out physical and all that is not really in Carolina's DNA, or hasn't been, quite frankly, for nearly ever. I mean, we could argue a long time ago that it was, and it has been in certain seasons. But Jason, how much motivation is last season for this team? How much positivity or good is it for the Florida State team, knowing that they basically did what they did to this virtually the same bunch of Tar Heels minus quite a few stars? Where's the balance there?
I think it matters a lot to the Carolina players. I mean, this is one of those where there is no overlooking a 1-4 Florida State team this year. I mean, with what Florida State's put on film so far this year, even with some of the struggles that Carolina's had, it could be understandable to come into this game and go, should be able to handle these guys. Yeah. We'll take care of them. But after last year, Florida State will have their full attention all week. I'm confident of that they are motivated more than the norm to handle business this week because of getting embarrassed last year, losing to a team that they had no business losing to. So I do think motivation wise, this is one that not just this week, but during the year, I can guarantee you when the schedules came out, everybody's eyes went to, that was one of the couple games that they went to. They would have looked at Virginia Tech. Okay, that's our opener. Okay. And then where's Florida State? We got to get those guys. I mean, I guarantee you that was one of the games that those guys wanted to take a look at and that they've been looking forward to. So I imagine that they're going to come out with a lot of extra motivation all week, and that will probably translate to some early chippiness and passion. You know, they're not going to come out flat in this game. If anything, the concern is that they come out a little bit overhyped because they're going to treat this as a big game. So on the Florida State side, I don't think it really matters much other than to say, for the coaching staff to say, yeah, we can beat these guys. I mean, look at last year. I mean, yeah, they got a really good quarterback. Yeah, they're good. You know, we all know how good they can be, but I mean, there's no reason we can't beat them. So you're going to get that, but you're not going to get the same kind of, you're not going to get the payback motivation, obviously. And this Florida State team has so many weaknesses that it's not like they're going to come into this game full of confidence, knowing like, oh, we beat them last year. I mean, if there's one thing, I mean, on the Florida State side, if I'm the coaching staff, I want to look at that film again and I want to show that team, look here, if this game goes 1 minute longer, you guys get beat. And secondly, this team can be beat. You know, that was a better North Carolina team last year. We beat them last year. So that's how I would do it in terms of motivation on that side. But yeah, I think there's a lot of little pieces of intrigue off the field in this respect, in terms of motivation and all that add up to some more interest in this game.
Yeah, and I said Carolina hadn't really outworked and done that. Not consistently. They did it last year down in Miami, and they've done it to NC State for the past couple of years under Mack Brown. But Greg, looking at the talent, and this is something that the line 17.5, I don't bet. I can't imagine that line being for this game, given the amount of talent. Now, getting it done
I'm not
is
surprised.
Really? I mean, that Greg, I'll let you do it, and then Jason, you comment. That just seems really, really high for a team that's Florida State's far better talented than their record, and it's like they get up for 1 or 2 games a year lately. Greg, is this one for Florida State? Hold on, Jason. I know you got a lot. Let's let Greg get in, the stat guru, and get his piece in. But I wouldn't bet 17.5 for anything on this one. Am I crazy?
Well, I mean, Carolina has a winning record against the spread this year, 3-2. And part of that is, and I think Mack Brown phrased it exceptionally well this week. He did it Monday and did it again today, when he described this offense as big play, bad play. And that's spot on. And as we've seen, there's so many opportunities, especially with Josh Downs. And as much as Sam Howell's struggling, he can still make some big plays. And we've seen splash plays. And that's when this offense is at its best. And when you can do that, you can put up points in a hurry, especially if the opposing team has some breakdowns, and you can take advantage of those. And so North Carolina's ability to score as quickly as they can, it's one of those situations where it's either probably going to be a blowout for North Carolina, or if turnovers go in Florida State's way, then it's going to be a very competitive game. And I think that's probably why the spread is what it is. is because they know that if North Carolina plays a pretty good game and Florida State just kind of muddles it along, then you're talking about maybe a 21-point differential. Can Florida State do better than that? Can they do what they did last year? Sure. But what happened last year, right? There's a pick six, there's a block punt that led to a one-play touchdown drive. A lot of things like that kind of snowballed on North Carolina, and that's why they fell behind 24-zip early in the second quarter. I'm curious to hear Jason's take on this team compared to last year's team, because Wake Forest is a good team. I think Louisville is probably better than a lot of people give them credit for. Notre Dame, I think, is a good team, not a great team, and Florida State played them pretty well. So it would appear that they're maybe a little bit better, but then you add in the fact that North Carolina has had a ton of success at home. Last year was on the road. A lot of different things kind of go into it. So I'm a little bit with Jason here that I can understand the spread, but I really believe this is going to be a blowout for North Carolina, or it's going to be a really competitive game.
Go ahead, Jason.
So, I mean, I think it's a good spread precisely because I wouldn't want to bet it on either side. And for exactly the reasons that Greg just laid out. I mean, This could absolutely be a North Carolina blowout, or it could be a down to the wire football game between two teams that wind up really close. So, I think the spread is right in the area, right in the zone that I would have put it. I think it's a fair estimation of where the teams are at. Now, in terms of this year's Florida State team versus last year's, that's a hard question because in both years, there's been kind of multiple Florida State teams because of a lot of, I mean, they've been decimated by injuries both of the last 2 years. And which team you caught when or have caught when this year has mattered a lot. Now, the team that played Notre Dame was coming out of camp healthier than they've been the rest of the year. I mean, you typically are in your opener. I think that team would have beaten last year's Florida State team pretty handily. I mean, probably by 7 to 10 points, reasonably comfortably on average. But the problem is that since then, and during that game and since then, they've dealt with a lot of problems, a lot of injuries, and a lot of roster turnover that has, I think, the team that played Wake Forest, for example, would have lost to last year's team by 10 points. The team that played North Carolina, they'd have probably lost to by 14 or 17 in terms of what rosters were on the field because they just didn't have anybody that was healthy. You look at Florida State's offensive line this year and the number of starters that they've played, the different line combinations. Last game was the first game they'd started the same two line combinations 2 games in a row. And then they didn't finish the game with that line combination. So, I mean, and North Carolina fans, I saw on the Tar Pit premium message board earlier today, I saw somebody say that North Carolina's offensive line is the worst in the ACC. And it was pretty plain to me that this person has not watched very much ACC football other than North Carolina. Because I'll tell you right now that Florida State's offensive line on the year has been a lot worse than North Carolina's offensive line, partly because they've been so banged up. I mean, they've been a mash unit. They came into the year and basically they had 2 offensive tackles, 2 guys that they knew that could actually play the position. It was one of those well, let's hope one of those guys doesn't go down. Hope he doesn't get hurt. And as it turns out, the left tackle went down in game 1. Well, actually, I guess it was the end of game 1 and then also beginning of game 2. So he played first part of the game against Jacksonville State, the part of the game where they scored some points. And then the rest of the game, he was out, and you could tell they didn't have another tackle that could play there. So they shuffled some things around after that. He came back a couple of games ago playing right tackle because he actually couldn't set into that foot. He actually could not pass set or push off or do anything on that foot. So it was well, we're going to move you to the other side, move our other guy over to that side, because this is we've got to have you on the field because you're, even with one leg, you're better than any of our other tackles right now. So we're going to do that. But God forbid anybody rush to that side of you because you can't actually hold up on that side. So that's the situation they've been in at tackle. And the other one's banged up too. Their right guard is a guy who's coming off season surgery, knee surgery. And if you watch him between plays, he's visibly limping. He's just gutting it out. Their starting center has missed 4 games. And their left guard is battling an ankle injury that he got in the first game. So you look at that group, and they were pretty average to begin with, and they're average and walking wounded. They've struggled all year to block people. And then you pair that, North Carolina's struggled at times to block people. They've been pretty average up front. They've been banged up at the center position, all that, but they're average basically up front, which they should not be with the guys that they have. I mean, it's not good enough for what they've got talent-wise up front to be what they've been. No doubt, it's frustrating. But the benefit is you got Sam Howell behind him. That's a guy that can make up for some of that stuff. Now, he's not always helped them this year in some ways, but you got a guy that look, he's a Heisman. He was a Heisman front runner coming into the season for a reason. Florida State has had one-legged Mackenzie Milton. I mean, the guy is a medical miracle to be walking, and he's started 2 games for Florida State at quarterback. And then you've got Jordan Travis, who came into the year with a knee injury and then hurt his shoulder against Wake Forest, and he's been banged up ever since. And then you got wide receivers that can't separate. They're average at wide receiver at best, and they lost last year. Teams had to account for Tamorian Terry, who didn't play actually against North Carolina last year. So they got a more comparable wide receiver situation than what they're going to get this year than last year. Than most teams last year. But last year, they could depend on having one guy that teams were afraid of beating them deep. This year, they don't have that guy. And then they've got some decent but not great running backs. And you say, okay, well, where are you going to score points? Like, what you want to have an identity on offense, but having an identity depends on you being able to do something well. And they don't really have anything offensively that they can do well. Last year, they had a couple things. When Travis was more healthy, like he was against North Carolina, his legs were something that they did great, but he's been banged up. He looked a little better this last week, so we'll see what he looks like coming into the Carolina game once he gets there. I mean, if he trends healthier, then that gives him more of a weapon. But they don't have a ton of firepower offensively, and they don't block well enough to just be able to pound you. So that's that side of the ball. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think they're a good bit better on the defensive line than they were last year. Even though they're a little less talented, I think they're playing better on the defensive line with their starters, but they have 0 depth. And they just lost one of their sort of co-starters at defensive tackle for the season to a chop block. And so he's out. And then you look in the secondary, and 3 of their 4 top secondary guys were out last game. So, and they're flat bad at linebacker. So they've got to protect their backers with a good defensive line. They've been able to do that at different points this year, but as soon as they have to dip into their depth on the defensive line, they're really vulnerable. And then they've got some players in the secondary, but they've had a lot of issues with communication and buy-in in the secondary from some of those guys. And like I said, last week, 3 of their top 5 and 4 of their top 6 defensive backs were out. So if some of those guys are playing, if Travis Jay is actually healthy and playing at boundary corner, defensively, they're better than they were last year. If that guy and, a couple of their other defensive backs are out, they're not better than they were last year on defense. They're basically what they were. So that's kind of where they're at. It's a team where with this team the last 2 years, it's not been a motivation issue for why you've gotten the inconsistent play. It's a combination of a lack of overall talent. This is the least talented Florida State roster I've seen since at least 2009, and I think it's less talented than that year. So probably going back 2007, the year that they barely made a bowl with Bowden, and that team was probably more talented than this one. So I think this is the least talented Florida State team since the 80s, probably the early 80s. And you combine that with the injury trouble, and you combine that with this being a second year in a new scheme and a new coach after year 1 was a COVID year, and you're going to get inconsistency because you don't have talent. You've had a ton of injuries, and you've got, a lot of program instability the prior years where there's just not a lot of continuity. So they have enough players like on the defensive line that maybe they can turn you over a couple times and give you a real handful. But, game in, game out, they just don't have enough weapons. You're used to Florida State having a bunch of weapons, and they don't have that. They're not a team that you expect to score in bunches. They're having to create points with smoke and mirrors and just scheme, basically trick defenses into giving up freebies and steal some points here and there. And that's what they're doing.
Greg, I'm hearing Jason, and I swear we're partying like it's 2020, because I heard the same stuff doing this very same podcast this time last year going into this game. And people are scared to death of Travis's running ability and that Florida State defensive line, Greg. Let's talk about Carolina's ability to stop Jordan Travis and why goes back to the spread, why the spread is accurate to you guys. If it is accurate, they've got to stop him. How does Carolina do it? I think we hinted on it yesterday on the Beat Live. Ja'Curious Conley becomes a big factor in dealing with the running ability of Travis, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. And as Jay Bateman has told us, for 3 years now, the reason that his defenses have struggled against running quarterbacks, by and large, is an inability to effectively set the edge, especially consistently. And that's proven to be problematic. And so I think what North Carolina did against Duke is probably going to be a similar scheme, just because if Florida State wins this game, you don't want it to be because Jordan Travis ran all over you. You want it to be because he beat you through the air. And that's all we've heard about for the past year and a half, is how good these North Carolina cornerbacks are. They kind of took a beating in the Virginia game, but Armstrong is a very good quarterback. But this is the type of game where you tell those guys, look, y'all, you lock down on the outside. We're going to leave you out there on an island. We're going to do everything that we can to take away Florida State's running game. And if Travis is healthy, as Jason talked about, that's going to be your key component there. And then you get them behind the chains and you make him have to throw the ball on third down. And that's the strategy. And Conley, as we talked about the other night, Tommy, he is a big dude. He looks like he belongs with the linebackers and not with the safeties and nickels.
And then you watch him run.
Right, exactly. And that's just an impressive skill set that he has. I like what Jay Bateman did last week, as we talked about. The emergence of Cameron Kelly, especially against Georgia Tech, gave Jay the confidence to be willing to move Conley up and say, I feel good about what we have at strong safety. Therefore, I can use Conley in a different way, as well as cross-training Don Chapman in the offseason, where he was able to play both safety and cornerback last week against Duke. Now you've got pieces that you can move around. You can really utilize Conley in unique ways. And I think that's defensively, that's what they're going to try to do. And as we talked about so many other times, North Carolina's offense, as much as it struggled, if you're able to hit on a couple big plays early and you put a team like Florida State in a hole, that changes the complexion of the game. And really limits what they can do. And that gives Jay Bateman an upper hand.
Jason, one thing I want you to expound on Conley in this game, but somebody in the chat yesterday asked about if Carolina's going to play straight man on the outside and man in the defensive backfield, you're going to have a lot of backs turned to the quarterback. And if he gets free and runs, then that's an issue. Is that the approach against a guy like Travis? And then you let somebody like Conley just run free. That seems to me that you put a lot of pressure on your linebackers and your defensive line against that running quarterback. Am I wrong there?
Yeah, it is. It does put pressure on it, but it also gives you a +1 in the box, which is why so many teams do it. So what I mean there is, if you're going man free, if you're covering everybody man to man, then you're going to have, 5 players to cover the 5 guys at release, or if they block one, then you green dog it, right? He just becomes a +1 as a rusher. So those 5 are in coverage, and then you may have a deep safety, right? So that's 6 guys in coverage, and that leaves 5 basically free. at that point. So you can have a +1 against the pass rush, to where you're forcing one-on-one matchups all the way across on the offensive line. And you feel like you should be able to win one of those, especially against Florida State's offensive line. And that's why you do it. You basically put yourself in a position to do that. Now, what I think I would be looking at pretty closely if I were Bateman in this game, I would probably want to cover Florida State with a lot of one rat or one robber. So it's basically varieties of that. It's a man-free type coverage, but essentially everything gets funneled to the inside of the field, where you have a hole player in that intermediate area who's another free player. So let's say you start in a two safety shell. One of those safeties rotates deep over the top to deep middle. The other safety rotates down to become intermediate middle. And then if the quarterback runs, that safety then becomes an additional +1 to handle the quarterback wherever the quarterback goes. And that gives you an athlete in the middle of the field. That's one way to help slow down the quarterback running game at times, because the other thing is that when you do robber type coverages, because things are funneled inside, guys are in man coverage, but they're actually tending to tilt and play outside leverage instead of inside leverage, because you're trying to funnel things to that robber or rat. Because if you throw there, that guy jumps anything on the inside. So that's one thing that against running quarterbacks, you'll see defensive coordinators do a little bit more if they feel like they've got the guys to be able to cover on the outside. Because you have to have guys that can run on the outside to be able to do this. You're just going to get guys that'll run by you eventually. So, and I think Carolina's got the corners to be able to do that. Now, the complicating factor to all of this is that what Florida State's going to do in this game, I expect, is they're going to basically do what they did against Syracuse and try to win a bunch with the screen game on the outside to basically get guys out of the box, because they can't throw the football in the intermediate area of the field. They can't. Their best hope of being able to throw it is basically to turn the game into a triple option, where they're box counting. They say, okay, there's 6 in the box. We've got 5 plus the running back plus the quarterback, 5 offensive linemen plus running back plus the quarterback. This is a run read. We're going to run zone read, or we're going to run quarterback power or something like that, right? Now you get one extra guy out, or one extra guy in the box to stop that. And then whichever side they've got a -1, whichever side they like the matchup to, now you've got a receiver screen. And what they did last week is they actually would play with 2 and 3 running backs on the field. And they'd line one of the running backs up to the right side behind a tight end split wide, another running back to the left side behind a 6'4" receiver split wide, and then a back in the backfield with Travis. Or they'd go with, a trips formation where you'd have a tight end and a big receiver and then a running back behind him. And then Travis might be an empty. And so this whole thing, the whole design is, if you've got numbers out there, if it's a 3-on-3 out there, or if it's a 2-on-3, defense has 2 over 3, then you're throwing it out to the running back. And now, instead of requiring your offensive line to block, which they haven't been able to do all that well, you've got basically an ISO play on the edge. Now the ball takes a second to get there. So, guys have to hold it, or you can have some trouble. And Syracuse actually jumped one up. The tight end missed the block. Syracuse actually got the interception on that. It's an inexcusable missed block, but that happens. But as soon as you commit some additional resources to the outside, then they're running the quarterback, then they're, running the extra back that's in the backfield, those sorts of things. So what they'll try to do is basically force Conley, for example, as a nickel, to go out and cover the screen area and get him away from the quarterback, right? Get Conley out there, get another safety, get your boundary safety on the other side. And those guys have to deal with the wide screen game. And then we can play with everybody else here in the box. That's what they're going to try to do. The thing that Carolina's got to be able to do is win with their interior 3. This is a game where going some tight with the 3 bigs might be good, even against some more spread stuff. But basically, if they can win in the running game with those guys, then basically that obviates that, because they can commit. They're just going to have to tackle well, deal with blocks on the edge and basically beat blocks and tackle on the edge so that they don't give up plays in the screen game, the quick screen game on the outside, and then win in the box with your defensive linemen. You do that, and this Florida State team is going to have a really hard time scoring because they're basically depending on that screen game to be able to open up enough run lanes to be able to matriculate down the field a little bit in chunks, running chunks and little things like that. And then finally set you up for, a little slip where it looks like a screen and then a guy's suddenly heading up the field where you've got little, slip from the one side and a wheel up the sideline, and they're trying to, pick on you because you came up too quick against the screen. That's what they're depending on, is that stuff to create some cheap stuff. And other than that, it's just Jordan Travis periodically setting up with a play action and trying to take a shot on a post or a deep ball because they don't have any other passing game because they can't trust their quarterbacks to make those throws. So, if Milton comes in, they've got a little bit more in the passing game there, but he's got other limitations. So that's the thing. To me, can Carolina win on the defensive interior with their defensive linemen in that 3-on-5 situation and be able to let those backers do their things? And can they beat blocks and tackle in the screen game? If they can win on the outside, it's going to be really hard for Florida State in this game.
Let's dig into the actual what will happen after the break. I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. They're sponsors of this podcast, and Jason's favorite ad read of the Inside Carolina Network.
Woo!
They look after us. They're great friends. Like I said, they give you 10% off your order if you're a premium subscriber. And if you're a premium subscriber, you've seen Jason break down tape all week and all season about the very things that he's talking about. I'm sure we'll see plenty of it next week after Carolina and Florida State do, in fact, play on Saturday. But join them on Franklin Street at Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. Join them online. Get whatever you need. Tailgate. No home gating anymore. You need to be in the Bowls lot on Saturday. Join us out there for the live radio show with myself and Joey Powell. Get some Johnny T-Shirt swag and come see us. National guys are going to pay the bills in 3 seconds. We'll be right back with the game plan. All right, boys, it's the Game Plan Podcast. Tommy Ashley's your host. Jason Staples is there. Greg Barnes is there. I'm watching the Cardinals and the Dodgers, which is why I'm sitting in a recliner doing the podcast. If somebody said I was sitting in the dark last night. I mean, it's like as bright as it can get in here. It is called a man cave for a reason. Greg, Carolina's defensive approach, as Jason outlined it, and what Florida State's trying to do. Who's the most important player on the field for Carolina tomorrow? Not named Conley, if you think it is Conley.
Well, I think there's two guys. Just listen to what Jason said there that have to be effective. And it's Miles Murphy and Ray Vahasek, and they have to be effective up front. You don't have to dominate, but you have to control, and you have to be able to win a lot of your battles at the line of scrimmage. And if you can do that, you really kind of tie things up. And I mean, Conley clearly is important here. And I don't think there's any question about that, how North Carolina can use him, the impact that he can play defending the run. But if Florida State's able to have some success with that screen game, and he has to help out and commit over to the side, the defensive line has to play well. And I think that's very important. As Jason said, when the defensive line's doing what it's supposed to do, that really allows the inside linebackers, Gray and Gimmel for the most part, to fill the gap and really take away running lanes. And that's what you got to do. And as we talked about earlier, the outside linebackers have to do a really good job setting the edge. And if you're taking away options and you're able to win at the point of attack, then Florida State just is not going to have many options. They're going to have to throw the ball, and that's what North Carolina wants. So I really think it starts up front. Yes, Conley is clearly a key figure, but I think for North Carolina to be able to have success, especially stopping the run, it's got to be Vahasek and Miles Murphy because they've had success thus far this year anyway.
Jason, is it Miles Murphy? I mean, is he the most reliable defensive lineman? And you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to ask that too as well. You mentioned going three bigs across the front. A lot of people have wanted to see that more. Is this a game, like you mentioned earlier, but is this a game that Jay Bateman can do that effectively, even with Travis back there?
So it depends a little bit on personnel packages. I mean, you have to be mindful of what personnel packages Florida State's in. But I think this is one of those games where basically the question is, are you going to sacrifice a little bit more to be able to stop the run against a team that depends on being able to run the ball? Or are you going to think more about getting to the quarterback against a team that's not going to drop back and have their quarterback throw a bunch? So, I mean, last week, I think it was 70% of their offense basically was Travis running, one of the two running backs getting his hands on the ball, or the tight end. Everything else was less than was 30% of the offense or less. I mean, they just didn't do much else. I think their leading wide receiver had 26 yards last week, if I remember right. So, I mean, this is one of those games where, if you're Bateman, you want to crowd the line of scrimmage and you want to muddy things up on the interior a lot. Because one of the things Florida State does is they get very creative in the running game. They try to move you around and create new gaps with all sorts of different movement and formation. And they're trying to trick you. So one of the things you can do to kind of cause problems for that is sometimes just basically get enough dudes in the game that if they're moving around, you're going to have to run around those guys. So I think there will be moments in this game where the three bigs approach is going to be the way to go. There are going to be other times where you're going to want to have, because of the issues of setting the edge against a quarterback who, because of how much of an injury history Travis has, you want him actually to run more between the tackles. So that's the other side of this. And it depends on what you feel like in terms of setting the edge. Do you feel like you can set the edge better by putting your, two big interior and then maybe a Rucker and a Tamon Fox or a Des Evans out there as an edge setter with some length to be able to run him down as he goes out, as he tries to go outside. So I think it depends on down and distance. It depends on what Florida State's doing personnel wise. But I think this is one of those games where you definitely, in my opinion, have to have your three big package ready for some of the stuff that Florida State likes to do, because they'll put two tight ends on the field and try to find ways with formation to create those interior seams. And I think with some of the big guys they have, they can give Florida State's offensive line some trouble and cause some problems in the running game that FSU won't want to deal with. So yeah, it really, a lot of it goes to all of that and what Bateman feels most comfortable with in terms of who his best 11 are against those personnel packages.
And here's the challenge, Tommy, is when we talked back in the spring about Jay Bateman has 8 to 10 guys that are 285 and higher, and he can play, 3 down linemen all he wants. And he's got these outside linebackers, and he's got some talented inside linebackers. It's going to be great, right? It's going to be this impressive defensive front. While they're having that conversation, what do they also do? They moved Ja'Karius Conley to safety. And the reason they did that is because you can only have 11 guys on the football field. If you have 12 guys out there, that is a penalty. And so if you start doing the math, if you got 3 down linemen and you want to use Tamon Fox and Des Evans or Chris Collins, and then you've got Gilmore out there because he's got to be out there, and then maybe Cedric Gray, well, guess what? We're already up to 7. And you got your 2 cornerbacks and you need 2 safeties. So Conley now is at nickel. How does that work? And that's part of the challenge too. And so I do think it's going to be more of a situation where you're going to see more of Murphy and Vahasek, most likely. And the fact that they're able to use Rucker as kind of a hybrid end and outside linebacker, you can use those 3 guys and still kind of get the same feel with Rucker being able to rush. And then you add in Fox Revens on the other side. And you've essentially got a 3-man defensive front there. But you've got 4 guys across the line, and that allows you to keep Conley on the field. So those are some of the math equations that Jay Bateman's going to have to be figuring out this weekend.
Yeah, and that is the question: is do you value having Conley at nickel more than having him at safety? Because when they do go 3 big, they're going to have to go. If they're going to go that full 3-4 type thing, they're going to have to put Conley back at safety, which they can do. It's just a question of who you feel your best 11 are against that personnel grouping. So yeah, that's the question. But either way, yeah, you asked if Murphy's that dude. Yeah, he has to be that dude in this game. I mean, I think, and you're also dependent on your corners to play well, I think, on the outside and be able to get off blocks and disrupt those screens. That's the other thing. Because of what they're doing in the screen game, they're forcing those guys to do well, to be physical and get off tackle or get off blocks and make tackles. And they've done that well so far this year. I mean, both Grimes and one have been doing, both 20 and one have been doing a great job in terms of getting off blocks and making tackles in the open field. I mean, they're bigger corners, and that helps.
Let's flip it. Sam Howell going against Florida State. It was a struggle early last year, and Florida State's got some talent on the defensive line. We've talked about Carolina's offensive line issues. How does Carolina have success Saturday afternoon, Greg? I mean, what do they do differently, if anything, to have some success against the Florida State team that's got some players out there on defense?
Well, as Phil Longo has talked about for 2 weeks now, one way you kind of take some of the decision-making process out of Sam Howell's hands is you give him some of those quick hitters. And I think that's going to be important, because I think Jason laid it out quite well earlier. Florida State's strength is the defensive line. So I want to give you some numbers here, Tommy. If your strength is up front and North Carolina struggles against pressure, it's pretty easy to tell you what's going to be the difference maker in this game potentially. Sam Howell, 35% of his dropbacks have been under pressure. He's got a 55.1 offensive grade in that stretch. He's completing 34% of his passes on dropbacks under pressure. And here's the key number. 33% of those pressures have turned into sacks. And so regardless of if it's the running back's fault or if it's Sam Howell's decision-making or if it's the offensive line not doing what they're supposed to be doing, all of these things add together to form this mess that we're currently looking at. And so if you can effectively apply pressure up front, that's going to stress that entire unit. And that's how you slow down North Carolina, because you don't have to sack Sam Howell every single play. But one sack on a series goes a long way in getting off the field. And I think you'll see a lot of that. So it's really going to be a matter of North Carolina being able to get the ball out of Sam Howell's hands quickly, try to find some running lanes that work. And if you can get some momentum going early, because UNC has struggled so much on first and second down, then it becomes a challenge for the Seminoles. But if the Seminoles are able to take control of the line of scrimmage, it's going to be another long game for the Tar Heels.
Greg referenced those first and second down struggles. Go back and listen to the On the Beat Live podcast for a complete stat breakdown that sort of blew few people's minds, but it was fascinating to listen to all those numbers. Jason, Carolina's offense versus your Seminoles defense. I see Jermaine Johnson's got 6 sacks and 8 tackles for loss to lead the league. That's a little troubling for a Carolina offensive line that has struggled blocking guys.
Yeah, no doubt. And what the craziest thing about this is that Jeremiah Johnson is a transfer from Georgia, because he basically was not going to get a ton of time at Georgia this year. And he is so far and away the best player on Florida State's defense. And I think going into last week, he was tied for the national lead in sacks and, right up there with tackles for loss. And he's leading the ACC in both categories. And you go, good Lord, if that's Georgia's table scraps, I mean, how good is their talent level right now?
I know. Think about that. ACC's best sack and tackle for loss guy couldn't see the field for Georgia.
I mean, he was in their rotation, but he was not starting for them.
Wow.
That's so first of all, let's just pause to consider what that means. That's just unbelievable. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is Florida State's far and away their best strength is that defensive line. Their back seven has all sorts of problems. And to me, Carolina can do themselves a lot of favors in this game if they come into this game determined to feed the ball to Ty Chandler in the passing game.
Yep.
The more they can get Chandler matched up with, in particular, 46 Lundy for Florida State, who's a good linebacker. He just can't run once you get him outside the box. The more they can get him matched up against him or against really any of Florida State's linebackers, the more trouble Florida State's in. They're going to have trouble handling Chandler in the passing game if Carolina can get him one-on-one with those guys. So that's one of the things that I know Longo is going to be looking at and going, okay, well, that's a matchup I like. I think also Josh Downs is going to be a problem, as he is for everybody. I think they run a little better on the back end than some of the teams that Carolina's played in the last couple of weeks. I mean, you look at Duke and Virginia. They were both so unathletic in the secondary that, I mean, anytime Downs caught it, he could just basically run away from those guys like he was playing a JV team. I don't think you'll see quite the same level of disparity against Florida State. But then again, if you go back and you watch the 55-yard run from Garrett Schrader last week, the Syracuse quarterback who's, 6'4", 230 and looks every bit the pocket passer, and he gets in the open field and sprints away from Florida State's linebackers and secondary. And you go, well, maybe those guys just are not the athletes that you're used to seeing down there. So, to me, this is a game where you come into the game determined to pass to set up the run and to use your slots and your running backs and your tight ends to get the matchups on the inside that you like. You can do a lot of damage against Florida State by using a lot of crossing routes, using tight ends, running backs, slot receivers between the hashes, and then on option routes and things like that to give them trouble, because the athletes at safety and at linebacker don't match up against some of the personnel that they've seen in the ACC so far, and certainly not against North Carolina, what they've got at those positions. So to me, you pass to set up the run, you try to establish a lot of quick stuff there to force those guys to move. This is a game where I would try to run Josh Downs on some crossing type stuff, some over routes, things like that, to get him across the field and just force Florida State to either switch off on him, which they've been terrible at this year, or to have somebody run with him all the way across the field. And I think, again, the athletic matchup there is going to be a hard thing. So I would be focused very much on trying to get Downs the ball in those situations and looking at getting Ty Chandler and also to a lesser extent Morales, who I think is a really good athlete at tight end. Get those guys matched up on the Florida State linebackers who just don't run well. And 20 covers pretty well for Florida State, but otherwise their backers really are a liability in coverage. And see what you can get matchup wise there. Get the ball out of Howell's hands quickly. That has to be an emphasis this week because of what they have on the defensive line. But there's so many things that they give you because of their weakness in that middle of the field in the back seven that you should be able to shorten how long the quarterback has to hold it. And you just emphasize to him, get it out. If you get it out against them and you can give your playmakers a chance against that back seven, they're going to make plays for you. And I think at that point, Carolina's offense should have some advantageous matchups. That's what I would be doing. And I know that's what Florida State is most concerned about coming into this game.
So, Greg, when we're talking about this game on Sunday, give me the players of the game for North Carolina, both a couple on offense, one on defense, and your prediction on the score.
I think offense, I'm going to go with Sam Howell. He has struggled a little bit this year. Some say it's regression. Whatever it is, he hasn't looked like the Sam that we saw last year. And so I think if he's able to get rid of the ball quickly and make some better decisions, both with RPOs and with some of the zone read stuff, I think that's all it's going to take. And so North Carolina, more than anything, needs him to really rally and play better. And that'll make the entire offense look better. For North Carolina to be able to stay in the ACC race, he's going to have to elevate his play. Everybody else is too, but if he can do that, he can drag guys along. We saw it in 2019. He didn't have to do it quite as much last year, but he needs to kind of get back to that role. So I think he's the key guy offensively, probably for the foreseeable future. Defensively, I'll go back. I think it's the defensive line. If you can really establish your position up front, that makes things harder for Florida State. As Jason's laid out exceptionally well, Florida State's really limited in what they can do. And so if you can win up front, that switches thing in your favor very quickly. And so I think Vahasik and Murphy, both those guys are probably going to be the players of the game.
Go ahead and give me your score prediction before Jason does, because I don't want him to be.
I don't have a coin on me. I think that North Carolina playing at home is they're more comfortable there. I think the crowd will help. I think there is a revenge factor that is going to play a part of this. So I've got North Carolina winning this one. I'll say 38-17.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. Too late. You can't pick it. Jason, give me two guys, two dudes that come out of this one and a score prediction.
So on offense, it's Josh Downs until it isn't. That's my dude when it comes to players of the game in this game. I expect him to have some big plays in this game with what they do and some of the problems that they've had in the secondary, and just in general some of the matchups that you're able to get against them. I think Josh Downs will have another 100-yard plus day. And then defensively, I'm also going to go with Miles Murphy. I think against this Florida State offensive line, if you've got a guy that can really control the defensive interior and force Florida State to, I mean, the whole offense is already left-handed, but force them to beat you with their feet instead of with either hand. The right hand's already cut off. If you can force them to do something else, then that really causes problems. If you can occupy a couple blockers or create havoc and pressure the quarterback. And I think Murphy's the guy that has continued to do that. He continues to flash more every game. And aside from him, I would say Conley is the other obvious choice here because of what they're going to be able to do with him. I think this is a game where I would expect to see a lot of the sort of Big 12 blitz, as it's called, basically the bringing the nickel off the edge for a fifth rusher, because that can force the offense to speed some things up. And against the screen game, a lot of times that guy can actually get into the passing lane. So I would expect Conley to be brought a lot as a blitzer, and I think he's going to be very, very disruptive. So cheating a little bit to get both of those guys in this. So that was not actually my exact score, Greg, but it was really close to where I'm going in terms of score. Again, I think this is one of those games where with a couple bounces early and things like that, Florida State could, end up hanging close and they could beat this North Carolina team with a couple breaks. But they'll need a couple breaks. And ultimately that's not something I would want to bet on. So I think North Carolina should be favored in this game by about what they are. And I think the area of score that I'm kind of expecting in this game is somewhere around Carolina 38, Florida State 13.
Interesting take. Close from both of y'all. I'll pick mine on Saturday in the Bowls lot at Inside Carolina Live. This is a game that, Greg, one of the points you made last night, I mean, we're recording this Wednesday night. You'll hear it Thursday. But on Tuesdays on the Beat Live, you said this game will say a lot about this North Carolina's character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that nails it. And I want to know what we'll be talking about on Sunday. What type characters will we be talking about on Sunday? But we'll talk about it plenty more Inside Carolina Live from the Bowls lot, I guess, 12:30 to 2:30. Join us down there. Staples will be on the phone. Barnes will show up. Who knows, who else might show up. Last week it was Ryan Switzer and Bug Howard. Might have some special guests this week. As always, Inside Carolina will have you completely covered for Carolina and Florida State, 3:30 on Saturday. Johnny T-Shirt, thank you. Greg Barnes and Jason Staples, thank you. This has been The Game Plan on InsideCarolina.com.